Welcome to the Code 4 Couples podcast, focusing on topics for law enforcement officers and couples to keep you and your relationship connected, resilient, and Code 4. Now, your host, law enforcement expert Cyndi Doyle, author of Hold the Line and My Wife.
Hi guys, and welcome back to Code 4 Couples. I have been looking for somebody to talk about retirement. So many people that I have coming into my office and emails, and it seems like everybody has a countdown clock going on in regard to 4 more years, 5 more years, 10 more years, whatever that is. And so I think it's incredibly important that we talk about what that looks like afterwards, because there's a lot of preparation that can go into it. So today I have brought on Nicole Davison, who specializes in doing career counseling and then also helping people move into retirement and re-careering. But I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit. Nicole, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you being here so much.
Cyndi, thank you for having me. It really is an honor. Obviously, I've been following you for quite some time, and I love listening to your podcast. And it really is very serendipitous to be able to be a guest on your podcast.
Oh, thanks. That makes me feel so good. Tell everybody a little bit about you, your background. First of all, how are you connected to law enforcement?
How am I connected to law enforcement? I've actually been a very proud law enforcement wife for going on 17 years. My husband and I, we've actually been married 20 years, and he has been in law enforcement for 17. It's pretty much the bulk of our time together. It's been a journey for us because when we met, he wasn't even in law enforcement. We've been through everything together.
And I think there's different people that meet at different times. And I'm the same way, whereas my husband wasn't in law enforcement when we started. And so it's like birth to, I hate to say death, birth to retirement. We are going to say, which is part of it. Tell us a little bit about what you do and why is this topic about careers and retirement really important to you?
Absolutely. I've been a career counselor for over 15 years. And it's funny because when my husband and I met, we both were in completely different careers. And through the beginning stages of our time in the professional world, I decided to change careers back in, I would say, about 2002. It was right after 9/11. I had been a corporate trainer. I worked in the staffing industry for a number of years. I knew that I wanted to help people figure out what they wanted to do. And honestly, in the beginning, I didn't really realize that was something you could do for a job. I ended up going back for my master's in counseling, but I'm not a clinician. I actually have my specialization in student development and higher education. When I started, I worked at a college. I was working in career development. And at the same time, my husband, who was working in corporate, he was starting to go numb, if that makes sense. And I think many in the law enforcement world might be able to appreciate this. My husband is a former Marine. And when I met him, he had just gotten out of the Marine Corps. He went into corporate, and a number of years in, I think he started to get that itch. And at one point he had said to me, I'm really starting to think about going into the state police. We started doing our own research, what that would mean for our family. We did not have children yet. Right now we have one son. And I just knew in my heart that he was meant to go in that direction. It's funny, I think years back, some of my friends would be like, how could you let him do that? And it was so odd to me. I thought, how could I not? It's truly where he was meant to go. Yeah. You know, when he started, and I've talked about this in the past, he took a $60,000 pay cut to go into law enforcement. Wow. Because he was in corporate. He had a very good job. He was an incredible leader, but he truly wanted to go into law enforcement. That's what we did. We made adjustments to our life and
sacrifices.
Yeah.
I think a big part of that too, what everybody doesn't know, I think I mentioned it to you, that I started out my career doing career counseling. I worked with low income folks, but then I also did layoffs. And I would go do outplacement counseling. So when I first met my husband, I was doing career counseling. And I had this pattern of career counseling my boyfriends, and they got into better jobs and then they dumped me. And a little joke between my husband and I is every now and then I'm still waiting for you to break up with me, because he was in the restaurant industry for years and years, fine dining. And if you knew my husband, you'd be like, what? I'm like, yeah, he wore a suit every day. I hate it. And he
Yeah.
was in between jobs at the time. And I said, what do you want to do? And he said, I think I've always wanted to be a police officer. And I naively, because this is pre 9/11, naively was like, oh, you should do it. Here's how you do it. And here's how you go to the police academy. And you got to do this. I think it's very similar that walking through that, but the sacrifice that you knew you were going to have to make in regard to the financial security.
Oh, yeah.
There's security there in the sense of there's always employment,
Yeah.
but there's also the idea of the risk and what could happen, but then also taking that huge pay cut.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. And that's what was funny back then. We were only a few years into our marriage, and I just knew that at the time it was what he was meant to do. Talk about around the time of 9/11, when he decided to go into law enforcement, there was such a pride. There was such the climate
Absolutely.
was so different. That was around 2005 time. And it was never even on my radar that I would ever have that thought of, what did he get himself into? As any law enforcement spouse would go through, there's always the fear. There's always, oh my gosh, are they going to be okay? But I think from a career standpoint, I knew that it's where he was meant to go. And
I think you're right in the sense that so many officers, it's about a calling. It's about making a difference. That's most of the time. My husband will joke and he'll be like, yeah, we all say that, but really we're thinking we just want to kick ass. I think that comes later. I think maybe there is an aspect of that, but it's really about it's a calling and it's something I need to do. Let's move into a little bit. You mentioned the climate is different. You mentioned, we know right now there are a lot of departments that are short-staffed. People are not going into law enforcement. People are leaving law enforcement. So the climate is definitely different. And I know a lot of people are talking about their countdown clocks. I was meeting with a couple this week, and she was like, look, I have it on my phone, and here's the countdown clock that we have going on. And I think many times what I'm hearing is that this is a calling, right? So I am getting something from this being a calling. We're looking at this end game, this deadline. I've made my 20, or I've made my 25, or I've made my 30, whatever that is, right? And then what? Because I think many of us are so focused on our officer being safe, or officers being safe. If you're an officer listening, you being safe and getting through. And once you get through, then it's like people don't recognize that there's it's like coming off a cliff almost. And so there's many different factors. What do people, and this is a big question, so however you want to break this down, what are some of the factors that people don't think about when they leave? Or I can also think about like grief professionally. What are some of the factors that go into preparing, or that people don't think about in regard to preparing for retirement or leaving law enforcement?
That really is an amazing question, and it is so important. And I think when I do go back to this with a lot of questions that are asked in this capacity, is that it's going to look different for everyone. And when you said something before, Cyndi, once you get there, I think it's important for any law enforcement professional to not wait until they get there. And that's important. You're preparing, but there's a huge difference between transitioning into a career that has nothing to do with law enforcement. If you retire and you want to continue to work, there are some law enforcement officers that when they retire, they want to go golfing, they want to go fishing. But I think you have to look at the big picture of where you are in your life. I know for my husband, he joined the state police when he was on the older side. Was he in his late 30s? Yeah, he was mid to late 30s, where there are some law enforcement officers that they go right out of high school, right out of college. Some retire in their 40s. My husband, if he ever retires, I don't even know if he's ever going to, he's 17 years in, and he's not looking at that 20-year clock, because a lot of it is based on our family. We have a 12, soon to be 13-year-old, and we're not going anywhere. And he loves what he's doing. But there are some out there that are so done. There's a lot to unpack there. I think it's going to depend on, what does retirement look like for you? Does retirement look like, I want to do something else? I want to do something similarly in my field, but maybe not in a law enforcement department. For example, maybe someone might want to transition into public safety at a college, or work in some form of law enforcement within a corporation or a hospital or a community. That's a huge difference between just retiring, being done, golfing, starting a food truck. It depends. It's different for everyone. Now, and the reason I say that, preparing, for example, I have some clients that I've worked with in law enforcement that they came to me about 4 years before they were retiring. And they knew this is where my interests are. Some law enforcement officers decide to continue their education. They are in the process of getting their master's degree while they're still working. And what does that look like when they retire? It all depends. Does that make sense? It really depends on the person.
Yes, yes. And I think you're so right in the sense that some people are just going to, my husband also started his career when he was 35.
Yeah.
And so he was older when yeah, that's weird for me to say. I keep forgetting how old my husband is. But so he started at 35, which is way different than I have a firefighter as a client. And I remember we were talking through all this trauma that he'd worked through. And then I was, holy crap, you're just turning 30, because he started when he was 19 as a paramedic. Yep. And so he just had his first baby. And so it's like, he's going to be doing this for a much longer time.
Yeah.
While he can retire, there's going to be a second career, probably, if he decides to retire, as opposed to other people may retire and be in their late 50s, early 60s and be different. You said, don't wait to start talking about it. And what I was hearing was have some vision. Yeah. Have some vision about what you need to do. I have to think that there are aspects that people miss when they're creating vision.
Yes. When you said that, though, that kind of struck a nerve. And I want to touch on that for a second. Be prepared that your vision might change. That is so important. And I'll use myself as an example with my husband. And I talked about this before. When he first went into law enforcement, I think that it was just such a shift from working in the corporate world to going into becoming a state trooper on the highway. And at one point he was, maybe when I retire, I'll go and be a lobsterman fishing on. And it was funny because he wasn't someone that went fishing. He'd never caught a lobster in his life. He went to the Naval Academy, so he knows water, but that was so random. But a number of years in, he became a detective, and he started to realize how much he loved the analytical component to that. Blood stain analysis, blood spatter. He has so much specialized experience where he has these certifications that he's the only one in the state of Connecticut that has a particular specialization, which we would joke around and think maybe one day you'll go into that field and be a consultant somewhere. But here we are 17 years in. And Cyndi, I will tell you, the transformation that I've seen with my husband has been incredible. He has been writing poetry. He has been volunteering at an equestrian farm, an equestrian center for therapeutic, which I know you could totally appreciate that. He volunteers his time at this equestrian center. And horses, it's been amazing just from the standpoint of coping with some of the traumas that he's experienced in his career. I share that because 15 years ago, that was not even on our radar. Now I joke around with him and say, if you retire one day, we'll just go buy land out in Montana and get a horse, and who knows? And that's why I say it could change. Your life experiences take you down a path that you have no idea where it's going to take you from the beginning of your career to where you are now. So I'm so passionate about that, because being aware of your vision, but recognizing that it could change, especially in the middle of COVID, right? So much has changed for so many people. So sorry about that tangent, but that's huge.
I don't think it was a tangent at all, because we have these ideas of pivot, right? Everybody was talking about pivot during COVID, but I think as law enforcement families that we are used to change. We're used to adjusting. We're used to missing out on events. We're good at pivoting because there is this thing called law enforcement, right? That we are used to adjusting for.
Yep.
I think that's really important. I think there's also maybe a different component to that I'm going to get to and lead into this way. Many times we were just talking about that it's a calling. This job is usually a calling. And so it has purpose. And I think of what you had just said about your husband and some of the other things that he's doing. And what I hear is that he's finding purpose elsewhere. How does that purpose shift? How can people be more successful in finding purpose outside of the field? Is there, because many times I think officers can become very linear in their focusing, and even Gil Martin talks about this. We become very, this is our purpose, this is our focus. It can be very all consuming. What I'm hearing is finding purpose outside of that is really important. Are there ways that you recommend that people start to do that? Because I imagine purpose, vision, retirement, it all goes together, right?
Yes, absolutely. It all goes together. And I talk a lot in my field about the self-assessment, right? And knowing your values, your interests, what motivates you, what's important to you. All of that comes into play when it comes to trying to decide where your path is going to lead you. But the biggest thing for me has always been change. Everything changes. And when I think about how you can do that, how you can find your purpose outside of your career, outside of law enforcement, the reality is our spouses, they experience a trauma that many could never even comprehend. To me, I feel if you could find your purpose outside of law enforcement, sometimes it does coincide, but sometimes it doesn't. And it provides you that foundation of being able to cope with some of the hardest stuff that you're ever going to go through. When you start in the academy as a police officer, I don't think anyone could truly prepare you for what it is you're going to experience on a day-to-day basis. And obviously in your field, this firsthand, how it affects you, how it affects the whole person, and finding those areas outside of that to be able to not only find your purpose, but a big word to me is coping. How to cope with it. Because I think honestly, for my husband, finding what he found in working with horses and writing poetry and even playing the guitar, that came from really needing to find a way to cope with the uncertainty of what he was going through, the changes, really just the life events that we've been through as a family. I know on the side I had shared with you, but we've been through some really big events in our family in law enforcement. We live in Connecticut. He is a pretty high-ranking officer now. He started as a trooper and then a detective and a sergeant. And with that has come so many experiences that change you. It's changed me. I can't imagine. And he's not a big talker. Clearly I am. He doesn't talk about stuff, but I've seen, and maybe it's because he's a Marine, he has this amazing way of coping where, and it's funny, years ago, he would run. He's been an athlete his entire life. He's a wrestling coach. That's another thing too, wrestling. He wrestled for the Naval Academy when he started there. I think as an athlete, he's always found ways to cope physically. But my husband, yours, he's going to be 54 this year in April. His knees don't work the same way as they used to. I used to joke around with him about 10 years ago. And I said, one of these days, you're not going to be able to run that. He used to run a 6.5 minute pace for a mile, and he would run marathons. He's run Boston. And I said, you're not going to do that forever, but he still is running. I think finding his purpose in being able to cope with the uncertainty of life has brought him to playing the guitar, writing poetry, working with horses, spending time with my son. Those are things that it's irreplaceable. Does that make sense?
Yes, it totally makes sense. And as you're talking, the word that came to my mind was adding depth and dimension. I was talking about that linear aspect. And I think in adding I try not to use the word balance. I really hate that word, balance in your life. I try to say that makes sense to me, adding depth and dimension. Everything, it's a one-legged stool, right? You need multiple legs if you're going to have something balanced. And when we think about retirement, many times, while it seems like it's a finish line, you mentioned running, and I think about crossing the finish line with this. It's crossing the finish line, and then what, right? That's where the dimensions maybe are important. You mentioned values, interest, and motivation. How do people find that out? What do people do to figure out what their values? Values to me is, I'll mention that word sometimes in session to people, and they're like, values, what do you mean? And I thank goodness I have a handout, and I'm like, here's all the values, or here's a bunch of them. Values, interest, motivation. How do people dig in and explore those categories or topics for themselves?
There's actually a lot of resources online that you can find. I know for me, I love the strong interest inventory, and it's something that I was exposed to when I started at Sacred Heart University. back decades ago. And it's something that I work with my clients. It's a series of questions. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with the Myers-Briggs, the DISC. There's so many different, it's funny you say you don't like balance. I don't like the word assessments, but
Okay.
but it is an assessment. And I'm
Yes.
huge on self-assessment. Many can take it online, but it's important sometimes to find someone that can interpret it, that's certified. For example, I'm certified to interpret the strong interest inventory. It has a lot to do with your career. And there are other interest inventories or assessments out there that are based on your personality. I don't do personal thing. It's not about your personal life for the strong interest inventory, but it does talk about personal interests because it does compare your leisure activities versus your professional activities. And I love being able to dive into stuff that, because sometimes when, especially a law enforcement officer, you want to be a police officer, you become one, you do it for 20 years, and then all of a sudden you're at retirement and you're like, well, now what am I supposed to do? And that's hard when it's been your identity. How do people do that? I think through talking to people, if you are comfortable doing that, researching things online. There are some free assessments that there's one on ONET that you could put the link in show notes that it's called makemynextmove.org.
They've changed it from when I was in there years and years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Make my next move.
I think it's called it's ONET, but it's Make My Next Move. And there is a link to it that I'll make sure that you can put it up in the show notes.
Perfect.
Yeah. So it is free. Those are free. The ones that I do are not free, but there are free ones. And even if with Google, there is so much out there right now. But it's sometimes shoveling the ocean. You need to really think about what works the best.
I know that it can be overwhelming. Most of our officers, or as officers, what happens is they're so used to being told what to do.
Yeah.
For 22 years, my husband was told, do this. And when we're looking at, and this goes for everybody, but it's maybe even a little exaggerated, maybe it's the right word, for law enforcement officers, because I don't know what to do, because I've been told what to do all these times. And so that can really feel overwhelming when you're trying to look and make a decision, because it's like, is there a right decision or is there a wrong decision? What are some ways that what are some decisions that people need to consider along the way when they're looking at retirement or moving forward or moving out of law enforcement?
That's a great question. And when you think about it, again, I always go back to it's different for everyone, but you need to think about what you need from it, right? So what do you need from your retirement? For example, officers need to continue to work to continue to bring in income. If you're going to retire to another career or to just do something else to earn an income, that looks very different than someone that's, you know what, I put enough money aside. My wife and I, or my husband and I, or my partner and I we're fine financially. I just need to find joy. I need to find peace. I need to find calm. I think that's a big question to ask yourself. What do you need when you retire? Do you need another job? Do you want another career? Or are you just looking to just transition to something else? Not drive our families crazy. Because one of my clients said that to me. He said, my wife needs me to do something because she doesn't want me home. That's what he said to me. It was so funny. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but that's basically what he said.
Or maybe be experiencing it.
Or yes, absolutely.
I'm like, he's always home.
Yeah.
And I think that I want you to finish that, but I think that's something I want to talk about, because it changes our relationships too, when things like that change. But he was saying that my wife needs me to do something.
Yeah. Yeah. Because think about it. They've been on this journey of hypervigilance, this constant state of go, and then all of a sudden it stops. And I think it's really important to evaluate what retirement is going to look like for you. And most of the law enforcement officers that I've worked with that are retiring, they're retiring, but many of them go into corporate, believe it or not. There's such a huge desire to hire law enforcement officers that are very analytical, have strong sense of duty, commitment, integrity. There's so many. It's funny because I've talked about this. When someone says, what can you do? What can't you do? You could do anything. It's really up to you. And that's why I think it's so hard deciding what you want retirement to look like. Do you want to have a job that you have to go to every day again? You might want to. There are some people out there where I wouldn't want to just go golfing every day. Even thinking for myself, I've learned so much about myself this summer. I need structure. And some law enforcement officers, when they retire, they might really struggle without that structure. You might need to have an environment where it might not be going to a police department. It could be going to college, working at a college. I teach career planning at a university here in Connecticut, and my students have no idea the incredible history behind our public safety officers at the school that I teach at. Almost all of them are former state police, former chiefs of police from different jurisdictions in Connecticut. If anything, they should feel very safe being at Quinnipiac because the highly decorated police officers. But the beauty of that, for anyone that has children, they decide to go, and our public safety officers there, their kids go there for free. Not for free. They have benefits. They have tuition benefits.
Right.
Spouses have tuition benefits. There are benefits to that, but I use a college as an example because it's a very different experience, but you're still touching your field. Now, there are others that say, you know what, I don't want to be in law enforcement anymore. I'm done. Close that chapter. I want to work in sales. I want to work at the grocery store, just as a cashier. You never know. And I think that's why I say it's different for everyone. Or if you just know you want to retire, the factors that I would really consider, number one, your family, your spouse, your extended family. Do you want to move geographically? It's a big thing. I joke around and I say, oh my gosh, we could go south. We could get a big house with a wraparound porch and a horse and a pond, and it would be so me. A girl can dream, right? But
come on down to Texas.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You never know. I might be knocking on your door one day, Cyndi. But yeah, it does. I keep going back to the foundation of it's different for everyone, but it's important to really take a step back and think about what retirement means to you. Does it mean I don't want to think about anything anymore? Or I've been itching to do this and now is my time to really start thinking about it. Does that make sense?
Totally. A lot of what you're saying is determine your needs.
Yeah.
And really figure out what those needs are. Once again, maybe with flexibility, because it may be that you think your need is X. And then once you're doing that, you're like, oh, wait, I'm missing something here, like structure. Or maybe as a family, you realize, oh, wow, this looks different. And maybe we have a different need now. I want to touch on something you said, and you didn't label it, but as somebody who's aware, I'm like, that's something that I think is struggling. Transferable skills. Yeah. Transferable skills are what can we take from one position and apply to something else. And many times what I hear from law enforcement is these are my skills. I can't do anything. But you just hit on some things like that you said employers really like, that people from law enforcement are seen a certain way with a certain set of skills that are not gun manipulation skills, right? That's one of the things I heard are some transferable skills in there. What are some transferable skills that are really valuable that you see that law enforcement can take with them?
Oh my gosh. It's amazing. And I almost want to just scream from the rooftops to remind our law enforcement officers how incredible they are. The last couple of years, it's all they're hearing about is how horrible it makes me crazy, because as someone that worked in staffing for as many years as I have, I've been looking at resumes for over 20 years. I will tell you the dedication, the commitment, the work ethic, it's the leadership skills that law enforcement officers have, report writing. When you think about how many reports they've had to write, writing skills, interpersonal skills, the ability to stay calm under pressure, the ability to handle sensitive information. Everyone's skills are different. I know for me, I have very strong verbal skills. My husband, his leadership, I've never considered myself a leader. He has a leadership quality, as quiet. He's a very quiet, reserved man, but he could lead, and he's incredible. So that's the thing where I think each officer is different. But if I could make it more general, what I said before, there's so many transferable skills that a lot of times, and you mentioned before about, what did you say, gun maneuvering, or you said something about
gun manipulation.
Yeah, so right. That's something that I've done with some of my law enforcement clients, where we have to kind of transition their resume to a civilian resume where
Right.
you're not talking about homicide, rape. There's words that are not, you don't put
They're
them
common
on.
for us.
They are
right?
bloodstained, blood, but there
Brain
is a
matter.
way,
Yeah.
exactly. But
Yes.
it's also handling very stressful situations. You transfer that into corporate, even someone that works in fraud analysis. If you have someone, a 20-year veteran of law enforcement, they would scoop them up in a heartbeat. And but it again, do they want to work in fraud analysis, or do they want to start their own food truck and make tacos? It all depends on what they want to do.
And you were talking about some of those needs and people doing different things. Sometimes don't give my husband some credit because in essence, I mentioned he was in the restaurant industry before. And in essence, he's moving more towards, he loves to cook. He is a badass cook. And I don't mean, I should call him a chef. And if anybody follows him on Instagram, you will drool over what he makes. I think it's Bobby Doyle 503 if you want to watch.
I follow him already. I do.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
People comment, oh no, I see what you're eating all the time, Cyndi. And so it's wine, it's food and sunsets. And when he's presenting to people, he will say that he had to remember who he was. He lost himself for a while, and he'll flat out, I'm going to try not to cry. He said that I lost myself, and I had to recognize that I had gotten away from really tapping into who I was.
Yeah.
And food and cooking is his soul. That's his creativity. Your husband writes poetry, my husband cooks.
Yeah.
And so it's a way of finding that. And we're not sure where that's going right now, but right now he's learning Italian right now. So there's these little aspects of him that he's finding himself. It's just taken a while for him to find those other pieces of himself.
Yeah. Something I want to mention that's so important that you just touched on, and it's so important. First of all, I just want to also add, your husband has the most incredible voice. I just listening to him
it's one of the reasons I fell in love with him.
He
lived in Baltimore. I lived in Texas, and we had AOL Instant Messenger at the time, but we would run up long distance phone bills, and I'd be like, can you just speak to me on the phone?
Oh.
It's so radio DJ voice, but
seriously, no, he really, he has an incredible voice. And that's another, but something you mentioned though, just, I could see your emotion behind that. When you think of a law enforcement officer, when they are in the height of their career, many of them have to close themselves to everything else in order to cope with what they're doing. I think it's very healthy for him to start exploring, learning Italian, cooking more. I think everyone gets there at a different time. And yes, there are some first responders that are out there that have already figured out their path. They know they're going to go down it. Others, they had to get through the big stuff. And then all of a sudden now they're where they are. And like, I forgot how much I loved to cook. I forgot how much I love sitting with my wife and looking out at the sunset and enjoying a nice glass of wine. Because guess what? 10 years ago, I couldn't do that. I couldn't relax. I couldn't be me because I was really closing that off. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
But yeah,
makes sense. Yeah. You have touched on it a little bit, and I think it's worth unpacking just slightly, that when officers retire, that it doesn't just impact them, it impacts the family and the spouse. Part of what we know is that there's a commitment by the family to be in this field. And many of us, there's a part of me that resisted it for a very long time. That's just my husband's job. And I resisted it. And then I never went on the other side of the spectrum of having blue line stuff all over the house, or we're a blue family. That's just not me, because that one of the things that was really important to me is that it wasn't always present. And I say that as you're sitting here looking at me and staring at a blue wall, which had nothing to do with that. It goes with my artwork. But there's this element, regardless of where you are on that spectrum, part of our identity as spouses, or part of spouses' identities, and also I would say children's identities, are that my spouse, my dad, my mom is an officer, is a cop. And as a part of that, there is some transition and some grief that probably happens with that. I think needs can be different too, because I think for me, I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to be great to have him home all the time, because I never have him home, and have him emotionally, not just physically present, but emotionally present. And then at some point in time, you said, my wife needs me to go do something. I think there has to be some conversation around that and what those needs are and what retirement is going to look like. Is there a way to, the right way, but how do couples have those conversations and talk about the expectations, the needs, security, maybe moving forward when they decide that leaving law enforcement? And I think that's another thing that couples need to decide together.
Yeah.
That somebody's going to leave law enforcement. What are some of the things that you recommend that couples talk about?
Goodness, it's funny. We're there. And I think it goes to every aspect of your marriage as a law enforcement family. My husband is 17 years in. Everyone jokes around, 20 years you'll be able to retire, but we don't know if that's going to be the time. He might retire at 23 years. He might 24, who knows? But it all depends on what's going on. But I'm already starting to talk to him about that, because I know for me, even before we had our son, I've had to make adjustments to my career based on his career. And I know not everyone has had to do that. And that, again, it all depends on the makeup of your family, whether it's just you and your husband or wife, whether you have children or not, whether you have family around. I know for us, we don't have any family in the state. So it's really just us and our friends and our community. And I've talked about this on other podcasts on my own, even, that the day my son was born was the day that I decided that I was going to become a stay-at-home mom for the time that I did. And I don't regret that for a second, because he was in major crimes. He was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, looking back, that was 13 years ago. And now he's 17 years in, and I'm finding my pivots are even happening as a career counselor, just with my own company and my teaching. The reason I share that, I think the earlier you can have these conversations, the better. Don't wait until you're at the doorstep of retirement, because that could cause some shifts in your relationship. You mentioned before, just with him being home, I can tell you at different ranks that my husband has been in, there were some times where he would have every other Monday off, right? Just because he's on call 24 hours a day and they get that every other Monday off. And there are still some days when he's home and I'm like, why are you home? Because I'm like, because
we get used to it.
You do. And when it does, it changes the energy. And that's me one day. I can't imagine 7 days a week when it's almost like you're going full speed. And then all of a sudden you hit a wall and it stops and you're like, what just happened? Oh, you're home. And I think having the conversation early enough with your spouse, with your partner, what is retirement going to look like? How are we going to adjust to this? What do we want to do as a couple to preparing for this change? Because
transition, right?
Yes,
transition.
absolutely.
How are we transitioning? And it's just a lot of times, how do we take small bites? How do we take small sips of water so when it stops, you're not hitting the wall or drinking from the fire hose, or however you want to say it?
Yeah.
You figured out how to do it. And I think that's so important. I was sitting here reflecting while you were talking, and it's also an aspect of, I had coping skills that were in place that helped me because he was working and gone. There were things that I did to take care of myself. And now I'm like, wait, when do I get to watch my sci-fi movies? Because you hate them. Just things like that, that if we're in healthy relationships and we're doing this lifestyle well, as spouses, many times we develop another sense of identity and to take care of ourselves. And some of those things just stop. And you might think about that as a couple, as an officer, as a spouse. You may think about what are all those things that would shift and change.
Yeah.
And there's going to be some amazing things. And then there's going to be some things, oh, do I want to give that up? How would that look? Is it going to be okay if I go hang out with my girlfriends on Saturday night, now that my husband's home all the time, or whatever that looks? Is it okay if your spouse is home and taking care of things and you're still working 8 to 5? There's all of these aspects. When I went through this, and there's an emotional component here for sure. And I was not prepared for the emotional aspect. And there was actually some resentment I had to go through too.
Yeah.
And I'm super happy. And at the same time, irritated. It's a transition. And thinking about those things, I hit some things that I wasn't prepared for. I thought I was, but I wasn't.
It's funny that you're saying that, Cyndi, because I think both you and I have been through so much in our marriages as law enforcement wives. And the fact that you can reflect on that because you want to help others figure out how to go through the transition, because again, it's not always going to be a linear path. It's not always going to be point A to point B. And I think it all depends on our relationships, on our coping skills. You are a helper. You want to help people transition through. That's huge, because there are some out there that it's like menopause. Some breeze right through it. They just breeze right through retirement. And then others, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm losing my mind here. And so I think, again, it's being aware that you might have some bumps in the road, but the more you I don't want to say map out or plan, because the best plan is sometimes the plan that you didn't make. I totally just made that up, if that makes sense.
I think that's quotable.
Right? We'll just have to quote that one. And that's the thing, right? You've been through this. So you're looking back and think, maybe we should have talked about this earlier. Maybe we should have had a plan in place. I can watch my sci-fi shows on Saturday night. Sometimes when he's home, I almost want to be, and I've been through it more now than say 10 years ago, because we coped with a lot when he was gone, and I got used to that. And I think that's normal, whether you're retiring or not. But when retirement is on the front doorstep, you don't want to panic. I'm not ready. I'm not ready, spouse, to retire, because I don't want them home all the time. You don't want to get to that point. We're talking about this today because my husband and I were on a dock on a lake the other day, because we rented a lake house for a couple of days because we weren't able to really have a big vacation this year. And I was literally standing there talking to him, and I said, we probably really should start thinking about this, because say 10 years from now, 15 years from now, where are we going to go? And he doesn't want to talk about this stuff. He looked at me, he rolled his eyes. I'm like, no, seriously, he may not be ready to talk about it now, but all of a sudden, if his department starts talking about it, he might be ready. I think having the conversation together, but also for yourself, mentally preparing for that. We need to be aware of how this is going to change the dynamics of our family, of our marriage, of our existence together. Because you said all of a sudden they're home all the time. And it not only is a change for your law enforcement spouse to retire, but it's a change for you. That's huge.
Absolutely. And there's so many different layers. We could talk about this a lot longer because we're talking about identity, but I think we've hit the main points. So I want to summarize a couple of things that you've said along the way. First of all, the most important one that you started with was don't wait to have these conversations until it's pending and right there, that we all need to think about a vision and what you want that to look like, having conversation. That if you're the one moving into retirement, making sure that you have some depth and breadth, and you're inviting some other aspects into your life that provide purpose and meaning, which is really important, because this many times has started off as a calling. And a part of that is also the coping skills. You mentioned values, interests, motivations, and that there are different ways to find out more about yourself. I'm going to use it that way since you're assessment, but really assessing is I'm getting curious about who I am and who am I? What are these aspects of me that I can move forward with? Identifying needs as far as what are needs of the individual, that's the officer, what's in need of the spouse, of the family, and how are we going to address those needs that come up along the way? And just remembering that there are a lot of skills that move over into other aspects of life. It's not just these skills or these things that I do aren't relevant other places, that sometimes it's about, you mentioned having a more civilian resume, maybe getting somebody to have help if you need to explore those values, those interests, those motivations. How do I transition to something else if that's what you want to do, and getting connected with somebody like Nicole or a career counselor or career consultant to be able to do these things. And then I think the last part we were mentioning is it's not just about the officer, it is about also as a spouse, and really making sure to just have those conversations about what it's going to look like, and then pivot. Be prepared that things are going to change. There's so much good stuff here. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about all this. If people want to get a hold of you, how would they get a hold of you, Nicole?
I do have a website, and it's www.nmdcareers.com. And I also have an Instagram page as well as a Facebook page, but you could find me with all of my different handles on my website on NMD Careers.
And it's ND
Yep.
Careers, right?
Careers,
Perfect.
yeah.
Perfect. And she also mentioned some assessments, and I'll make sure those are in the show notes for you to go back to, and as well as for contact information. This has been such a good conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. It truly was an honor. I appreciate it.
And until next time, guys, keep it Code 4. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. For more information about the podcast or Cyndi, check out code4couples.com. All intellectual property rights owned by CRLD2 Ventures, LLC, are protected by the firm of 9mm, 45 ACP, 5.56mm, and 12 gauge.